This video includes spoilers for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, otherwise known as the Sorcerer's Stone. Recently, the Cosmonaut Variety Hour did a two-part video on all the Harry Potter films, and as someone who's both read the book and seen every film multiple times over, it got me thinking about that old adage, the books were better. But is that really true? I mean, clearly, if you value detail, then the books are better. There are more characters, more plot points, there's just more stuff. The Philosopher's Stone takes about 4 hours to read, as opposed to the Sorcerer's Stone runtime of 2 hours and 45 minutes. The screenplay by Steve Kloves is only 134 pages versus J.K. Rowling's 223, and J.K. Rowling was able to add details like location descriptions and additional characters, whereas Steve Kloves was restricted to the format of a screenplay. But detail and length are not the only measures of quality. Of course not. If that was the case, then people would like Game of Thrones. Jokes aside, let's discuss this. The main difference between the books and the movies isn't actually any minutia like Peeves the Poltergeist or The Philosopher's Stone Chapter 1. It's the mediums in themselves. What I mean is, you're telling the same, or at least a very similar story in two different ways. The best way to examine the question of which is better, then, is more difficult. After all, you can't ask which is better, books or movies, because that's subjective, and much like comparing apples or oranges, mediums on their own don't have any objective quality, they're just mediums. So the better question to ask is, what medium suits Harry Potter stories better?
Back here again, can't get enough. JoJo explains some interesting stuff. Back here again, can't get enough. JoJo explains some stuff.
There are certain advantages of mediums over one another in telling a story such as this. For starters, a book is a much more flexible medium, being far more unrestricted in terms of length, whereas feature films have to contend with the standards set by theaters. Generally, feature films feature a runtime of about 1.5 hours to 3 hours, and even then, that's pushing the limits. Harry Potter 1, for example, is quite long for a children's film, and where the series does mature, the runtime remains much the same. This means building the world in a book is presumably much easier and more flexible. However, one advantage of movies over books is the increased visual aspect. The best example of this is comparing, say, Diagon Alley's written depiction versus its film one. In the book, there were shops selling robes, shops selling telescopes, and strange silver instruments Harry had never seen before. Windows stacked with barrels of blat spleens and eel's eyes, tottering piles of spellbooks, quills, and rolls of parchment, potion bottles, and globes of the moon. Now this is all well and good, but in the movie, look how the same scene can be depicted in a fraction of the time with even more visual aspect. We've all heard it said that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this is certainly true. A picture can also be taken as a more sensory experience and more quickly to boot. So with a story like this, it's clear that with books, you have more flexibility and addition of detail, but a film is more visually striking and a better economy of space. Or in other words, books can express anything they like for as long as they need to, but movies are inherently more engaging. Another facet is which media came first. Critically, Harry Potter is an adaptation of a book series, not the other way around, meaning that films are not only an adaptation, but a second try at telling the story, with different creatives collaborating, rather than a single author penning the entire story. That's not to say that the book version is a first draft by any stretch, but it is a very different process. While Harry Potter's general themes and story matches the broad strokes, there are many tweaks that Harry Potter takes, some of which are to its benefits. One example is of certain characters that have little to do with the narrative. Peeves the Poltergeist is one example. In the books, he's a mischief-making being who haunts Hogwarts, and while he does add some lore to the series, his inclusion is largely moot. He never features in a plot, and the difference between a ghost and a poltergeist never comes up later in the series. The movies exclude him, and what they gain is an economy of time and narrative. Sure, we might miss him, but is his exclusion really that vital? There are other minor antagonists inside of Hogwarts who are included, like Filch and Professor Snape. As an examination, I'm going to discuss Harry Potter 1, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone or Sorcerer's Stone, respectively. I'm going to grace over small differences, obviously like the fact that in the films Dudley gets 37 gifts and in the books he gets 38, and instead discussing the larger differences, like the omission of characters and threads. I'm only going to be discussing Book 1 specifically, but I'll also include things that are included in later films. Let's start with something more specific and significant than Peeves the Poltergeist. At the end of the first book and movie, there are some various challenges before reaching the Philosopher's or Sorcerer's Stone. In the books, there are several challenges, each laid out by a teacher, whereas in the film, each challenge is specifically attuned to one of the main trio's abilities. The reason for this change is likely due to how earlier scenes with the classes vary between media. A great deal of time is spent in the books in classrooms, many of the scenes serving to establish how classes work and depict Harry's school life and teachers. While this is all fine, this school life aspect slowly fades from the books to the extent that the final two books occur largely away from Hogwarts itself. Therefore, scenes in the books that feature the teachers and classes usually have teachers take a back seat to character development. For instance, in the Charms classroom in the movies, Professor Flitwick is a minor entity, with the scene dedicated to building Ron and Hermione's relationship. Therefore, having a challenge be issued by teachers in the films would be out of place. In both media, the books and the movies, the relationship between the trio is one of the most vital aspects. I'd go so far as to say it's the series' backbone. Therefore, it makes much more sense to include a challenge attuned to the kids rather than the teachers. This is an example of what I was talking about before. Making these movies afforded the writers much more hindsight. By 2001, when Harry Potter 1's film was released, 4 of the books had already been published. This meant that the movie's writers and directors, and even J.K. Rowling, who was involved in the script herself, had a better idea of the direction of the series. For this reason, the films are a largely better depiction of the series. There are some missteps and many differences, but on their own, the movies do a far better job with continuity and theming, where J.K. Rowling working alone does not. Sure, the movies don't include a lot of characters or story beats, but unlike other adapted series, Harry Potter doesn't suffer for it. A lot necessarily has to be stripped away to make a movie, but at the same time, Harry Potter was a series that a lot could be stripped from. Also, frankly, J.K. Rowling isn't a great writer on a moment-to-moment basis. After Cosmonaut Marcus's video, I went back to read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, but I found it rather difficult to get through. I don't think it's because the book is for kids either. A similar series I recently revisited last year was A Series of Unfortunate Events, which is a much more sophisticated series, full of author tone and accessible themes. This point is incredibly subjective, but J.K. Rowling has a tendency to write in a very dry manner. The structure of the works are impeccable, each novel having a central mystery which is fun to uncover, but I'd argue the same effect is achieved through a movie. In that case, the only way a book would stand up to the film is if the moment-to-moment writing was improved. Instead, Rowling writes in a style that reminds me of lists. There are 2 types of lists she uses. Lists of how things look, and lists of what people do, with dialogue sprinkled in. In fact, her writing is almost like that of a screenplay. An example from Book 1, page 132. Nearly Headless Nick was always happy to point Gryffindors in the right direction, but Peeves the Poltergeist was worth 2 locked doors and a tricked staircase if you were late for class. He would drop waste paper baskets on your head, pull rugs from under your feet, pelt you with bits of chalk, or sneak up behind you, invisible, and grab your nose and screech. This paragraph does a decent job in establishing school life, but again, besides one rather dry metaphor, the entire passage is just a list of things Peeves might do to you. In fact, it's not even a list describing what happened to a person, just a hypothetical one. The best part is that I didn't even choose this segment very carefully. I just walked to my bookshelf and flipped the Sorcerer's Stone open. So what am I saying? That the books suck? That the movies are flawless? No, of course not. The movies have plenty of flaws and the books are best sellers for a reason. But the reason wasn't JK's aptitude for writing. It was because she knew how to structure a narrative, almost like mystery novels, like I said before, with central questions and twists and turns. The structure, I'd argue, suits the films quite a bit better. In this way, the novelists get bogged down, the central story having to laboriously go into J.K. Rowling-esque list detail about everything that could be much more easily just shown visually, trimming all the unnecessary reading one has to do, instead delivering it in a much more robust and exciting format. I suppose this is all to say one very simple thing. When I sat down to write this script, I thought myself one central question. Would I rather pick up the Harry Potter books or watch the movies? For other series, this question is tougher. Even book series like Twilight have significant differences that mean reading and watching are more fundamentally different. I mentioned a series of unfortunate events where the question is tough, because both mediums are excellent in their own rights, be it TV series or books, so much so that they could almost be companion pieces. But for Harry Potter, would I rather read bland dialogue and descriptions with decent structure, or would I rather watch the passionate performance and craft of Daniel Radcliffe, Alan Rickman, and Maggie Smith with the direction of Chris Columbus and David Yates? The answer is clear. Now, because this is a topic revolving around the works of J.K. Rowling, the controversy of which I won't bother enumerating, I should mention trans rights and fuck TERFs. Thanks for watching, everybody. For 2021, I'm making one video every week to post every Sunday, only 48 Sundays to go. If you'd like more, please subscribe and also check out my Patreon. Special thanks to Jojuro and Luna, my 2 generous subscribers. Today's sponsor is the Illuminati, the secret shadow organization running your life. Don't forget to drink tap water, don't look up in the sky, and always take your pills. Illuminati, we're always watching. Thanks. See you next week.